Lakhani. Hi, everybody. Again, great to see everybody joining us both live and then hopefully also on the interwebs with our podcast and our video series. My name is Karim Lakhani. I'm a faculty member here at Harvard Business School. And this is a LISH, a Laboratory for Innovation Science at Harvard, sponsored series about AI deployments in enterprise, where we're really focused on the intersection of technology and business. Before we begin, I encourage you to turn your cameras on if you like, so that we feel like a community and a set of folks that are in the same room. But if you're in your pajamas, I understand, and you don't need to turn your camera off. But if you can, that'd be great. Secondly, please mute your microphone during the talk, but don't hesitate to ask questions on chat for us. Roger and I will try to have a dialogue as he goes through this information. We're both recording the session, both as a video and later as a podcast as well. After the event, you'll receive an email with information on our next session, which is on November 8th. And also will include requests for suggestions and feedback for our series, both topics and people we should be inviting. And also instructions on how to join our AI and Enterprise Slack community if you've not already joined. And this will include also materials mentioned in the talks, articles from our LISH team that we find between events. And then hopefully we'll also be piloting some mini talks as well from the community members to help folks connect and see where things are going. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce to Roger Magoulas to us. Has worked on AI and analytics before there was a thing called AI and analytics. So it's great to sort of see somebody from the mid-90s. He's been designing and implementing data infrastructure and analytics platforms for organizations like Sybase and Columbia Pictures. Most recently, he's been at O'Reilly, where he's built the data team to support both internal analytics and tracking technology trends for O'Reilly's radar content. And was behind the report that we're going to discuss, which is this AI adoption in the enterprise. Has run O'Reilly's famous food camps and conferences, and also O'Reilly's Strata conferences, and currently is also volunteering for the state of California's COVID Insight Task Force, where he provides guidance to the governor's office around data related to the COVID pandemic and in California. Assists on the Public Resources Big Box of Science project, produces webinars for those running data teams, and advises a few startups. So Roger, I'm super grateful that you are going to walk our community through this excellent survey you guys did, and then the insights you've gathered about AI deployment in enterprises.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that nice introduction. And let's hope, okay, great, this works. So the work on the survey came out of work I did for Radar at O'Reilly. And our main task there was to track technology adoption. As a publisher, you can imagine that we cared about what the next kind of things were so that we'd have books and conferences and other kinds of content to help support the community of developers and people in software. Now, I've got an analytic background, but while I really relied a lot on quantitative analysis, we also did a lot of qualitative work, and we were very community informed. And we were very lucky to have a great social network of people we could talk to. And plus, I'm a hands-on, I still code. You could kind of process what we thought was going on and what we thought was going to be successful in terms of adoption trends and not. And then we're trying to communicate those trends. As you can see, a lot of articles and reports I wrote on the O'Reilly Radar thing. Karim had mentioned Food Camp. I'll just describe it quickly. It's a unconference. They last a weekend, and there's no agenda. We just bring people together. And that's been really eye-opening in terms of the intersection of disciplines and seeing what people are thinking about and talking about in terms of technology adoption, what they care about and stuff.
Roger, I
So
hope we can later learn from you on how to run an unstructured conference, because everything we do at HBS is so bloody structured. This sounds scary. Like, just bring people together and go. Like, that seems kind of scary. So hopefully
I am happy at the end. I will give you my insights. We're running a virtual food camp right now.
Wow.
With a smaller scale, but we're doing it with Zoom. So it is possible. But I tell you, they're like the best weekends. They're so stimulating to be able to hear what other people do, and this kind of lack of ego that makes people, I think, share in a different sort of way. So it's been great for me. So I want to start off with this quote. If you don't know who Edgar Degas is, or Degas, he mostly painted dancers, but I picked this slide. AI, I think, fits this pattern. It sounds easy until you really try to do it. And when you really get into it, and what you'll see from the survey, that there are difficulties and roadblocks that need to be overcome. It is pretty difficult to get into the kind of production useful mode with this stuff. And I think it's requiring a lot of subtle maturing of the whole industry. I'm going to cover two reports, one just very lightly based on the O'Reilly platform, and the other is the survey. So we'll start with the platform. O'Reilly has a learning platform, a kind of an online compendium of courses. It's got millions of users. It's got 50,000 plus titles. It has mostly corporate enterprise customers. So that's the bias of the sample that was used for getting the data that I'll be sharing next. And what we do is we track the share of engagement with different topics. And when we looked at the data topic, which we put into 3 high-level trends, what we see is that data engineering is getting less share, and AI and ML is increasing share. So I just want to be clear, the left is order of magnitude, and then the right is the rate of change. So it's a year-over-year change in this. Now, it doesn't mean data engineering is less important, and anyone who's working in AI knows that you spend a lot of time doing data engineering. It's that where people are needing to learn and where they're focusing their time has shifted into the AI ML realm, and that the work is more supporting that. So that's something we know is going on. The order of magnitude is very high. And I'd say the data is the second biggest topic on the platform.
So Roger, who are these people? Are these the technical folks who are sort of making a transition? They said, we figured out data engineering and now we got to do AI ML, or what's your sense of that?
Yeah, it's a training and reference platform. So we're probably getting a more engagement with people training. So it's people trying to learn things. But I can use the platform, and if I'm developing something and I have a question, I often use it in a Q&A kind of format. So they're probably mostly technical people who are using this, but there are management topics and other things. So when we look at share, like you can see on the left slide that the share of AI is about a little less than 5%. But that, in business, 20% of the readership is looking at business topics. And those are probably people more in management or thinking of looking into management roles. So it is a pretty big mix of people, but the general engagement is around development and trying to either learn something new or answer questions about the work they're doing. And it's a lot of training courses as well are part of this. So that would bias it a little bit towards training. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, perfect.
Great. Okay, so now we'll get into the survey. It was done pre-pandemic. It's hard to believe that there was a time before our current era. We had 1,300 plus respondents, and I'll go into the demographics first so you get a sense of what kind of biases you might expect. It was half North America, half the rest of the world. This is pretty typical of our conferences, and it's a little more Europe than Asia, but we have pretty good representation on both halves. Diverse industries. And so while software and tech are important, as you can imagine, with O'Reilly, it's about a quarter of the people who responded. And we had lots of other industries, so finance, consulting, healthcare, government. So pretty representative across different industry groups. And the roles, while data science is the top role, and if you look at the technical roles, it's about half the people are technical, but we got plenty of executives. I remember 16% are actually, if you add it up, it's more like 25% were in some kind of executive or high level role. And we had a fair number of managers as well. That was around 15%. So this diverse group means that you're getting the kind of hierarchies and different functional areas of companies responding to their sense of AI adoption in the enterprise. Now, as far as maturity, we had just a pretty simple maturity level that we were able to infer from the results. Mature means you got things into production. Eval is pre-production, and no AI means you don't have anything there. But we had an interesting thing. We ran the survey yearly, and we had a big change in maturity. So we're a little more than a quarter. We're in the mature realm last year. This year it was over half. And fewer people are in the eval, and as you can see, a few less were doing no AI. Now, like any sample, you know, there's some noise in this, but this is a pretty significant change. And I think this is what's going on, is that production is where people are moving to in the AI world.
Are you shocked by that big jump? I mean, I mean, whenever we sort of see that in any kind of, if you go back to the last slide, I would be like a doubling in a year seems shocking. So what sort of tells you, what has changed? Is it that this group is weird and they're moving, or is, you know, like how do I make sense of this doubling?
Yeah, no, I think there's been a big change. If we can go back, I mean, 2018 means that we're probably people were into 2017.
Yeah.
Doing the survey, that there has been a big shift towards production. I really think that there's more maturity around it. There's so much instruction going on, whether you're doing a boot camp or Fast.ai or the O'Reilly platform. Yeah. There's just so much more going on. And I don't think it's so much democratizing, although I want to talk about democratizing access to AI. But I think there's been a big shift from everyone in AI had a physics PhD to more general use of it. And a lot of it has to do with the tools being easier to use, and developing maturity towards use cases where you can apply it, expanding their use. But I will say that, having said that, and this was pre-pandemic, I think there's increased scrutiny on this as well. So there's kind of like tensions, I think, going on in the space. But I hear a lot more people talking about workflows. You know, if you look at the product Airflow, which is a way to organize your data pipelines. It's also, you can use it for other things, but it's kind of common in data pipelines. You see a big increase in people using Airflow as something they're talking about in this space. And to me, that's a sign of production, because you're now making your pipeline something that's secure and not just done with a cron job or kind of a kludgy way, but a more formal and careful way. So, and I'd be happy to talk more about that. I think it's the space is changing. So where are these people? You'd expect AI to be somewhat in R&D, given where we are, and yeah, nearly half are in R&D. But you know, we've got a fair amount in IT, which might just be in a way an R&D kind of thing, because AI is software. But look at this: customer service, marketing, operations, manufacturing, finance. AI is happening all over the place. It's not just in R&D. And I think that's another thing that's been changing a little bit. We've seen more organizations thinking about trying to get into this this space. And if there's something that can come out of AI that helps them either optimize or expand what they're doing.
And do you know, Roger, just on that previous slide, like, you know, of those, how many are sort of the mature category versus those that are sort of, and so they said, I'm in manufacturing production, but I'm also mature versus I'm evaluating versus I'm, like, you know, not thinking about it.
Yeah, I don't have that data handy. And it might even be in my notes that I can't see underneath there. But generally, as I remember, there was a little bit more maturity in the non-AI spaces. And I think that's because someone had a real purpose. Like there was a very obvious use case.
Oh, you mean the non-R&D spaces?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That they were, there was something that really worked. And I've just picked manufacturing. This is more anecdotal than from the survey, but manufacturing, it's not people. The predictions work a little better because things tend to fail in a more normal way.
Yeah.
And there's a fair amount of things going into production in the AI world, and it's definitely a space to watch in this space. Bottlenecks. This is where I think the real value of the survey is, because the number one bottleneck is institutional support. And I think this is like kind of a rich area for discussion, because AI is somewhat hard to understand. I think the fundamental issues around AI is that it's not like software development. The number one thing is it's non-deterministic. You don't know if it's going to improve things or not. Number two is it's hard to schedule around. There's just a lot of unknowns in what's going on. It's interpretability, particularly with deep learning, is hard to sometimes understand. It's explainability is difficult. So there's a lot that people need to learn, I think, to make kind of the institutional support grow, and that you almost have to train your organization in AI. And I think because it's in the software area, people think about software as a way to frame how to think about AI, but that probably isn't the right approach. It's probably better to think about a portfolio of experiments and know that you're going to get some things that work and some things that doesn't. And over time, you'll get better at making those bets. You know, so that as you learn and you kind of look at your investments, you say, well, these ones tend to work better. Let's work off of that.
Roger, Roger, let's stay there for a second. I mean, I think so. This is like I mean, you packed a lot in there in the sense of like, so, you know, when people think about AI, they naturally go to IT. IT is fully deterministic and like sucks, right? Like it's always late, doesn't get stuff done, always under delivering and overcharging and all that kind of stuff, right? Nobody's ever satisfied with their IT groups, right? Sorry to all the CIOs that are on here, right? But it's true, right? And so now you're saying, not only does it not fit the typical IT bucket, but it's in fact going to be even more uncertainty. And it's like, maybe it's going to work. Like if I go to my CEO and say, well, maybe it's going to work, but make a bunch of bets, how are we going to get these guys to adopt? Like, because if there's no legitimacy in IT, and then you go in and say, maybe it's going to work, let us experiment. And we've never done experiments before. We always make sure that all of our experiments work out. That seems like a tall order.
Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart, right? But I think that what will happen is that you will start losing. If you can't make that leap, then someone is going to come in who can think expansively and say, I can run a portfolio of experiments. I can accept failure. You know, I'll just give one kind of cultural example, and not that Netflix is like the greatest company in the world. It has a lot of weird things. But when I was the chair of the Strata conference, we made sure that we had Netflix What We Learned in Data Last Year talk. It was the most popular talk every time. And they let everything hang out, what worked, what didn't work, and so forth. And I don't think you can argue that Netflix is not very successful deploying their technology. And I think if you look at their competitors in this kind of streaming space, who have a lot more ability on content than probably Netflix did,
yes,
they're still trailing Netflix.
Yes.
And why are they trailing Netflix? Netflix has a 10-year head start in analyzing streaming data.
Yeah.
And they're good at using AI.
Yes.
They're good at doing data management.
Yeah.
And so that's what those companies need. They don't need a better, you know, Marvel superhero movie, right?
Yeah.
They need the kind of the way that Netflix expanded what they can do and keep people engaged. And entertainment, you know, it's got a lot of artifacts that are different than other things. And so I think that if all your company is doing, and I think it's pretty broad to say that there's a lot of CYA when it comes to making investments. right? You don't want to be on a loser. You don't want to have a fail. But companies that can't, in a way, embrace failure as great learning experiences become learning companies, which to me means running a portfolio of experiments. But over time, they're just not going to do as well.
Yeah.
Unless they have some weird factor endowment, that's just hard to overcome.
Yeah.
In which case they get, kind of monopoly rents or duopoly rents or something from what they're doing. So I think the imperative is on getting better at this and rethinking it, because it's not IT.
But then this really has to be done top down as well, right? Like this seems to me like this is like at the C-suite level, at the board level, to actually convince the folks that we're going to run this as a series of experiments. We're going to learn. We're going to do pilots, and we're going to scale. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that the way to help be a catalyst for that is to show companies that have made some changes that have worked. And the most normal kind of success is when you've expanded your business, right? You've used some kind of intelligence to do something you couldn't do before. I mean, optimizing is great, and doing exploratory data analysis to figure out something you didn't know is really interesting, but you can actually do things that you couldn't do before. And, I'll just, full disclosure, I'm working for a startup called Miso that does search and recommendation engines, and O'Reilly just implemented Miso on their platform and now have a new Q&A thing. Yeah. So now you can use the O'Reilly platform to get specific answers to specific questions, including the snippet of what you want to look at. This has expanded what it can do. Before, the search brought up which books covered the topic you wanted. Now you're getting right into the kind of heart of what you're doing, and it's super relevant and stuff. Well, it's a competitive advantage. Yeah. And it's driven by neural networks and the fact that there's some semantics that you can learn. Yeah. I also think that when you look at back office and you look at data centers and stuff, there's so many opportunities to get better when you use some human augmentation based on deep learning to make that work better. Yeah. Data quality is another example where you can apply ML to make it, and ML will show up on this list here. So I think we've got a lot to learn, and I think the hype doesn't help. That's one of the reasons I showed that early quote, is that this isn't easy, and it's not a black box. And I'll just tell a story that goes back about 12 years when Hadoop was first starting to make its legs in the data space. And we're lucky. I was in Silicon Valley. I knew a lot of the people involved. We were very early on seeing the Hadoop kind of hype work. And when the company started coming in to commercialize Hadoop, they were selling it as, if you buy our Hadoop, you have data now. You've got analytics. Yeah. And that's like saying you've got a house because you bought a foundation. Yeah. Or you've got a house because you bought a hammer. Yeah. The hard work, was making sense of it. And I think that that's where the hype, it doesn't help, in that it hides that this is a lot of work. And you need to learn. You need to be a learning organization that takes failure as something that moves you to the next step. You need the attitude of, if you're familiar with the astronomer Neil deGrasse Tyson, he was on the NPR comedy show called Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. And they asked him 3 questions about astrology, and to be funny, and he got 2 wrong. And when he got the 2 wrong, they said, well, you're a smart guy, and we were able to trick you twice. And he said, wait, no, you've got it wrong. You gave me 2 opportunities to learn. And I think that that's how the good companies who embrace this in a realistic way and understand the investments they're making will have the best success in this. So I think it takes a lot of thought and a lot of engagement. I'd
love for people to just chat in here as well, their experiences on sort of this first level point on the company culture, and how do you actually do that? What have you found that has been interesting, or been a roadblock? Because I think that's part of, as we sort of build this AI and enterprise community, I think, we're going to we're going to nerd out about, convolutional neural nets and all that kind of fun stuff, but also the leadership challenges around this would be great for us to start to surface. And I think Roger's survey is sort of really highlighting that as a key element here as well. Sorry, Roger, keep going. I mean, each point is so interesting. Yeah.
This is the key point of the survey, right? So this is everything else. You're right. I will also say that and this is anecdotal, from my experience, the best companies with data do not start with neural networks. Yes. They always start at the bottom of the analytic ladder, see what works. Do they find something out from that? And if it's worth it, the investment, then you decide how much farther you're going to go. You don't just throw the, your PyTorch or TensorFlow thing at every problem. And I already used a hammer metaphor. I'll use the other one, just because you know how to use it doesn't mean it's always the right tool to use. Yes. And just as an example, and I've talked to a few people about this, about April of this year, a lot of models stopped working. Yes. Because there was now a month and a half of very different behavior. So what do you do? And what I heard some people say is, we're going back to models that we think people were using in the 50s. Huh. Right? Because we don't have historical data that is going to be telling about what's happening now. We've got to extrapolate from really subjective things, almost like priors, using real Bayesian stuff, but the priors are a little more subjective, and say, okay, given where we're at, can we apply some kind of model that tells us how we think things are going to happen over the next month or next 2 months, given this big change in our environment? And when is reversion to the mean going to happen if we've got these big outliers? Or do we have a step function, that's going to change things? So, I mean, AI is great. It expands the thing. I'm with the search startup, and it makes something happen that wasn't very easy to do before. But I think it's really important to go up through the tool set you have and figure out what investments are worthwhile. And that's also part of the, I think, institutional support for AI is applying it when it makes sense and doing that. Which brings up the next circled item here, which is the use cases. Yeah. Is that I think the more guidance, the more guardrails there are on the use case, actually better off you are with AI. And this goes back for me, over 10 years, I've been using some type of at least Bayesian logic to do analysis of unstructured text. And the more that you can kind of like make your problem understandable. This is one of the reasons logistic regression is such a great tool pre-doing neural networks, that the tools just work better and provide the kind of insights that you're hoping to find. So, the notion of a general AI, I mean, it's just, but from my eyes as a programmer and stuff, it just seems so far out that you're just not going to say, well, let's just throw an AI at that. What you need to do is, what is the circumstances and what would maybe work to help us get either an insight or augment the people involved by taking away some of the silly or tedious tasks or handling fairly large volumes of data. I know when running the data team, we often have data quality issues. And one of the rules of thumb we had is, if there was more than 1,000 of something, whether the domain of something was 1,000, a human couldn't do more than that in one session, right? So there's just human cognition limits on how much you can process. That isn't a limit with AI. So you can do that, augment what humans can do, and then work from there.
Roger, again here, I mean, people are sort of mentioning, it's a high percentage, 20% are saying sort of difficulties in identifying. Is this just a lack of imagination? Like, what do you think this is? Like, why is it, like, given how general purpose these tools are and these approaches, is it just that people can't imagine, like, or they don't know what exists? Like, what do you think is the gap here?
Yeah, and I think it is a bit of a lack of, it's not that so much a lack of imagination as, the Chesterton quote about imagination is really making settled things seem strange, not making strange things settled. And I think the lack of imagination is not being able to make the leap to what it can do, but being given a powerful tool. And unfortunately, I think one of the things that happened is because neural networks were particularly effective on images, and I think that's an artifact of just what an image is, you know, a bunch of pixels, that there was this kind of extrapolation that, oh, it'll be really good for everything else. I'll bring up NLP later. Language is way more complicated than a picture is. And I think that that's where natural language understanding will be an area of decades, or at least a decade, of research to get better at making sense of unstructured text. But we're just at the beginning of that. But what do you do with that? Why do you care about doing some analysis of that? Well, I think when you can summarize great hunks of data, I mean, if you've seen the data on how much COVID-19 research has been done in the past 5 months, trying to make sense of that is very difficult.
Yeah.
And things like, if you're familiar with Primer, is a company that does summarization using these advanced techniques. It ends up, that's a great augmentation to people trying to make sense of the field.
Yeah.
And what's really taking hold of people's mindsets, particularly people who are focused on an area in the sciences, I think it lends itself to that. But I also think getting off the optimization treadmill and looking at expanding what you can do, expanding what your business is hard for a lot of companies to do. It's you know, it's why the turnover in the Fortune 500 is so much faster now than it was 20 years ago, and which was then much faster than it was 40 years ago. Is that there's this kind of organizational stasis that somehow stops companies from going into the next thing as easily as they should, and thinking expansively. The flip side of that is that the practitioners have this really cool tool and they're looking for something to apply it to. And in some cases, they're probably not applying it correctly, or they're applying it without enough data or enough knowledge to have it make sense in the right case. But the place doesn't come out in this survey, but if you're familiar with RPA, I think it's robotic process automation, or just back office automation, so many companies are run in a kludgy, have processes that are kludgy, spreadsheets, people manually cutting and pasting things and stuff, that this is a place where automation and the extra sauce that AI can do to help people make this stuff work better can really be a big help. And that's a place where it fits the optimization pattern that I think companies tend to be pretty good at and know how to do, but also expanding what you can do with the tools that you have. So what I'll go to next is just the roles themselves. And I think there we go. I just want to, the lack of skills was only the third rated thing. And I think that that's an artifact of, there's a bit of democratization going on. There's things like Keras and auto AI, auto ML that make it a little easier to get into it. But I think that there's something else going on as well. And that's this data science, whether it's the boot camps or online things, there's more people who are able to do it now than ever. And it doesn't mean they're all great at it, but at least they've got some of the fundamental tools to kind of make some steps in and try it out. So there is a skills gap for sure. I think the maturity of the industry is something that is going to happen over time, but there are people who are trying to get better at this and doing more of it. And I've seen anecdotally people I know just getting way better at incorporating the tools and so forth.
Yeah, and, you know, so two things. Again, if folks have questions of Roger and his deep insights on this topic, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat, because I think there's a lot here. The other thing, as you're sort of saying, is like, you know, like I think what's interesting is that much of this knowledge is freely and openly available too, right? Like, you know, there's all these while these companies are offering courses, there's all the universities like us offer courses in a whole range of places. Some of it we charge for, some of it is free, but there's a ton of this. So it requires effort, of course, to do things and to invest in learning. But it's not as if there's some sort of magical secret code book that only a few people have access to. This has been widely pushed out there for everybody to learn from, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, I also think it's easier to dip your toes in than regular software development. I think because there's so much out there, and because of things like Jupyter Notebooks and tools like that, that you can get to try it out. And I ran a series of lectures this summer, and I had people from Viacom and from the Wall Street Journal, and in both cases, they had AI training for their management. This comes back to the first item about institutional support, is getting people that they didn't expect the executives to like write code that was going to be used someplace.
Yeah.
Just to give them a sense of how does this work? And I don't know what the training looked like, but if they were smart, they would do things that would address the issue that's going to come from my next slide, which is around data quality. You know, like when you improve data quality, usually the results of your model are improved, but improving data quality costs money.
Yeah. And
now you've got an investment, a classic ROI decision is it worth cleaning up your data to improve your model?
Yeah, and my view on this, I think I mentioned this before, is that like this is, you know, sort of data science now, you know, again, teaching at a business school, data science is the new accounting, right? People come to HBS, right, and for them we do an MBA, right? They have to take an accounting course. Most of them don't want to be accountants, right? But they have to understand how books get put together, right? How we think about various aspects of the inflows of cash inside the organization, and the various ways in which cash gets transformed. The same story I think is going to be around data science. And I think data science is becoming the language of business. And we're not going to train people to be data scientists, right? We're going to train them to be managers and to be leaders. But you better now understand data science and how it drives your company, and understand data flows, investments in data flows, how they correlate with models, and all that kind of stuff that fits together.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying, that if you're going to go without understanding how this works, it's going to be harder to make good decisions about it. And there's a German word, Fingerspitzengefühl, which means kind of like fingertip feel, that if you don't have a sense of how this works, again, you're just going to have a harder time with your decision making. And I know that we're talking about data, but there is intuition in some of this, and your intuition is improved by gaining wisdom by trying things out or knowing a little bit about the topic. And yeah, I think it's definitely worth knowing. And luckily, while some of the math is really crazy, the fundamentals of it's linear algebra, that you know, cosine difference is kind of a fundamental thing, that you're looking for local minimums and local maximums, that there's things called features that we used to call parameters, and that there's and now there's parameters that are hyperparameters, that these are the kind of language that it's good to understand what people are talking about. You don't need to do them, but it's good to know what someone means when they're talking about these things, because this is what makes the investment expensive, and in some cases, and what makes it not deterministic as well.
So Roger, there's two questions in the chat that I think are relevant at this stage. Andy Abbas is asking, you know, what type of resource skill set should organizations first introduce into the company to assess the organization's ability to adopt AI and determine use cases?
Yeah, that's I'm going to give some soft skills to start with, and that's curiosity and kind of humility around this. Is you can't think you know it all, and you've got to be open to learning to get going. And I think that there's a
but Roger, isn't that like, that's just good management practice, right? Like that's the type of people you should be hiring regardless of AI or not, right? So how do I make this specific around AI? So okay, good. So we do a good job hiring humble, curious people, right? Like we have good company culture and so forth. tell me, but how do I then translate that into like, okay, like this wild woolly world of AI?
Yeah, well, I just want to bring up one thing about you got to handle failure, right? So that's
Yeah.
one of the things you got to be able to do. So, and I think a lot of companies don't have that good culture. And then once you're into it, and
All of HBS affiliated companies are always a good company.
excellent. Glad to hear that. And then after that, it's I think understanding a kind of a and inculcating this at all levels, this notion of a hierarchy of analytics and what they can do for you. So understanding where these things fit, where basic statistics fit, understanding the shortfalls of basic statistics, understanding bias, right? So bias is really important, and I think it's worth talking about that as a separate topic, but understanding that all data is biased and that you need to address those biases in some way or another. And I'm not just talking about physical diversity bias and stuff like that, but just it's just biased. And then I think the things I mentioned, linear algebra, these are matrices. So you should understand what a matrix is and something about them, not so much that they're linear equations, but that the columns and the rows matter, that they have relationships to each other and that you can take advantage of those relationships to learn things that aren't otherwise obvious with it. And that to a point, the increase in computational ability has made bigger data sets explorable, and that because of the bigger data sets, you get better results. Your models are more accurate. You know, every company executive from the top to the bottom should know the George Box quote, all models are inaccurate, some are useful. And just to think about that in terms of how to do the adoption. And then after that, what you probably need are some high-level people who have the PhDs, who understand the math underneath. And if you can, teach them communication skills so that they can talk about what they're doing and that what they know can then come down to other people. And then the things that allow some bit of democratization, like data robot, stuff like that, some things Microsoft has, that those people have a path to, I'm trying something, is this worthwhile? Like a kind of a brown bag kind of a notion, so that the knowledge of the few can get dispersed more widely, that this is something that's discussed in an organization. And this understanding that models decay, that models need a lot of refreshing, that you're never done. I'd say that's an important part. If you're going to invest in being a data-informed company, it's not like a software project where you're launching an app and then you've got to maintain it lightly. You're almost in full bore maintaining it as you are in developing it.
Yeah.
And that you need that kind of mindset. So I'm afraid that I'm not answering, like maybe the person asking the question wanted a more technical answer. And I can just say from a technical perspective, Python is the productivity tool of choice. And while there are going to be some problems where you want a lower level language or something like Rust or Go or something because they are better at parallelism. But generally, you're going to want to start with Python. So it's good to know Python, how Python interacts with things like Pandas, which is something you're probably going to use to prepare your data, part of the pipeline. And then after that, I don't think it matters whether you're using, PyTorch or TensorFlow or whatever. At that point, you might want to optimize around something, but probably whatever is easiest to use or what you know to do that. But knowing that there's options, understanding what hyperparameters mean and how to adjust those so that you can iterate well, understanding feature engineering to know that you can take away and put in things that might alter your results and improve those results, how to do testing, how to know when you've got a better model, how to monitor that over time to know when it's time to refresh. And the last thing, and there is not a workbook for this, is putting things into production. No one really knows how to do this in the kind of systemic way that in the software world, where you can have continuous deployment and things like that. We're still learning how to do that with models. And so you're going to need to invest in figuring that part out.
Yeah. Great. All right, so we have 13 minutes left, Roger. I just didn't
Okay.
realize it was just a great time chatting. That
No, I think the chat is really valuable. So let me just go. I think data quality, I'll just say it's an investment. It's not, you're never going to have perfect data quality. So this is an important, if there were two things I would say to pull from this, one is institutional support, and two is data quality is not a binary issue. It's an investment issue. And you're never going to have perfect data. So you've got to figure out what is it worth investing in to make your data better, to get models better, because the investment might be too high in some cases. And you've got to, and luckily you can use machine learning to help improve your data models. Okay, I will just say that the risks, this is reinforced what I said earlier about the non-deterministic nature of it. Clearly that's manifest in how people think about AI in enterprise, so that's a big problem. Oops, I'm sorry, I clicked the wrong button. These next two are around the kind of understanding models and understanding bias, I think are kind of related. And these are risks. So I'll just say that I think the fairness thing is an imperative. It's not just nice to have, and it's not to be baked in at the beginning. And the reason I say that is a mistake is so costly in the bias thing, particularly for sensitive areas like around race and gender and so forth, that you really should be looking ahead of time to see what's there. But generally, to understand your model, you need to understand something about how your data was collected. What's missing? You know, what didn't you get that you really should know? What's changed over time and stuff like that. And I know that the models are sometimes hard to explain and hard to interpret, is part of this. The good news is that these are kind of well understood risks, that they've been consistent over time. And that, oh, I just want to say one more thing about this. I just want to go back to this. Most companies realize that these risks are widespread, right? So a little over 60% picked at least 3, 40% picked at least 4, right? These are the issues that we face. So it's good to like understand them and know that.
Again, I'd love to see the crosstabs here between those that are mature versus those that are not mature, and also by role. Because I think my sense today is, you know, I think even this question of fairness, bias, and ethics, there's a lot to be done here, right? In the sense of one of my future colleagues to join us, Seth Neal's PhD thesis is about fairness in ML. And, you know, his first discussion point was like, you know, close to more than half the models being deployed today are breaking some law, right? Because they don't actually know what the fairness questions are. And the fairness question is actually very interesting because it's sort of like, are you know, statistically, we want to be fair on average. But the law doesn't say be fair on average. The law says everybody has to be treated fairly individually. So how do you actually guarantee outcomes that are fair at the individual level when statistically, right, we're always thinking on average I'm fair, you know, but then depending on the distribution of that fairness, you might be super unfair to a whole bunch of people, and okay, you know, and so I think these are foundational questions for both the engineering staff, but also for the business folks that are going to be deploying this. And then understanding the crosstabs and seeing like how do we actually get them to start asking these questions now instead of the OGC, your general counsel, sort of calling you up saying, "Hey, what the hell's going on?"
Right, and your general counsel also needs to learn about what models mean. Right, that's an important factor. I think Pete Stormrow speak before to this group, and he's very big on this. The legal group needs to understand more of what's possible and how this is different than regular software from a thing. So, I mean, I think you're right about the looking at it. And so when I bring up fairness and bias, I want to think really expansively about this, because it's not just about the kind of classic things when we talk about fairness. It's that the data collected has a historical bias. It's probably missing knowing things that would be really important. So it doesn't mean you should throw all your models away. It just means you need to figure out, can you address this or not? And if you can't, maybe you do need to throw it away, right? Maybe you shouldn't make a model in a realm where, I mean, I'll just use one case like around redlining, around loans and stuff, right? I mean, bank data is, if you go back in history, it's going to be terrible.
Yeah.
It's going to exclude groups. It's going to be illegal. So you've got to figure out how do you accommodate that, and can you accommodate that and still follow the law, and also just live with yourself, that you're doing the right things. And just because the model tells you something doesn't mean it's the right thing. So I will say on the crosstab, the one thing is like around data quality, which I know wasn't so much the risk part here, but I think is related to risk. People who had in the mature class had a much higher respect for data quality than the people who are in the eval class. And my kind of little quote to myself was, they'll learn. Okay, so the takeaways. If you're not doing it now, it's time to catch up. It's pretty endemic. We've got this big increase in things going into production. AI does follow the dominant architectural trends, which means you can fit it into things you already know around things like Kubernetes and distributed data management and so forth. To think broadly that AI is probably applicable in expanding what you can do rather than just optimizing. You need to train your organization. I know we've had some conversations about that, and that the risk is pretty consistent and is definitely better understood. So at least we're getting that kind of, this isn't a magic potion, that there are risks to this, and that since we know them, we can then work better to get there. And then I'll just say, we're in a pandemic. I put post-pandemic up. I don't know, maybe I don't know when we're going to be post of all this stuff.
You're making me depressed.
Yeah. Well, okay. It is a little depressing, right?
Yeah.
But I think we're all learning to accommodate some of this. And I'm happy to talk a little about what I've learned from this COVID task force, which is really interesting. I mentioned earlier that models lose their saliency in the pandemic. So you need to consider alternatives to all this. There is definitely increased scrutiny of all parts of an organization because of the pandemic. And even in software companies, which are doing well, they're still, are we getting the investment? I think what happened is that there was a bit of a switch flipped around getting a little better at AI isn't just nice to have, and during a good economy before the pandemic, that was like, yeah, we can invest something in that. Now it's kind of like, okay, we need to think about this and what's happening. The trend towards putting things into production continues, which brings up this whole, we still need to mature around the workflow of what that means. The increase in serious consideration of bias and fairness, and that it's everywhere, and that it's not just after the fact, it's before. And that what makes a data scientist is definitely changing. And I have a feeling that people who invested a lot in their education and so forth are a little resentful of people who just kind of pick this up. But I think they all need to work together, and that there will be areas where someone who isn't that trained can get some really good results, but they need scrutiny and guidance. It's not like building an app. They need a lot of vetting and review and so forth. I talk to a lot of startups. A lot of them will say, well, do we need to hire a data scientist? And my answer is always, you can't hire one. You're just going to go into a downward spiral of that person's worldview. You need at least two, because you need different perspectives. And the more diversity, cognitive diversity, background diversity, physical diversity that you get, the better your data work will be, because you're thinking about everything. And I know we're really short on time, but I can tell a funny story about autonomous driving in rain. Natural language, I think, is going to be where you're going to see a lot of things going on in the future. And that, not that the pandemic caused this, but because there's more capture of information, that gathering things around sentiment and misinformation and so forth is where natural language is very applicable. And I think where you'll see things going on. And there's things going on using the math from condensed matter physics that ends up being applicable to language that I think can really change things. And quantum, if we ever get anywhere with that, will change also how we work with language. GPT-3, things like that. So that's the end of my slides. I know I didn't leave that much time for questions, but I'm happy.
No, there's a bunch of great questions here already, and I think I want to get 2 points in. One is Sam had asked this question about this lack of skilled people. Is this about difficulty of defining the role, or because of applications or AI is so new, or is it because hiring people?
I lost the end of the question. Sorry. I'm going to infer what the question was around hiring people. I think it's more around just understanding the limits of quantitative methods. Is that if you apply things in too simplistic a way, you might miss something important that's there. So I don't, can you guys hear me? I just want, okay, great. And unfortunately, I can't see the chat for some reason. So I can't see the question. So can someone
Roger,
else? Yeah.
If you go into the bottom of the interface of the Zoom interface, it'll have a chat available there.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stop sharing. I think it's because I'm sharing.
Okay.
There we go. That is what it was.
There you
go. Okay.
Yeah, so that's. I think you answered. I think you answered that question well. And Jeremy is asking about what are the effective, compelling ways to brainstorm for use cases with data science experts. For example, what strategies, methodologies would you recommend to flesh out domain knowledge that can be applied to AI ML models?
Yeah, there's a technique I use. It's kind of a general, and maybe you guys have something like this that you're teaching at Harvard. But I always start off with, what does paradise look like? What do you want to happen? What do you wish could happen? And then you back engineer from there about what's possible. What's stopping you from getting to that paradise? And then I think what happens is, if you can really do that well, you've then expanded the conversation to, gosh, we could go way beyond just our technical constraints or organizational constraints. If we could only solve this one problem, and then say, can adding, particularly if you can augment people, can that help get us closer to what we're trying to do? And I don't know, I'm guessing a lot of you are using e-commerce more often than before. And you've probably noticed that the search on e-commerce is beyond terrible, generally. And if you think about it, well, gee, search, they're all using a tool that was developed in the late 90s. That's Lucene, right? So there's a place that's really ripe for changing things. And so I'm just using that one place to take an example that we're all dealing with is like, boy, wouldn't it be great if something really understood what you're trying to find in an e-commerce kind of setting and knew a little more about you. So that's an example where you can say, okay, what does paradise look like? I see the products I really am interested in and not have to wade through a lot of fluff to get there.
Great. Well, Roger, thank you. We're at time. Thank you so much for enlightening us with your data and analysis. Tim DeStefano, who's here on the call with us, is helping launch our own very detailed economics-driven survey about adoption. So I'm going to connect you with Tim, and then maybe there's ways for us to collaborate with O'Reilly in the future, given the survey work that we're doing at scale. We're doing a national level survey in Korea as part of this. And so it'd be fun to sort of share some knowledge there. And then I hope that all of you will join us on a Slack community. Again, we're deliberately keeping it small so we can all learn together and share knowledge, because I think, my sense is, and I'm biased because, I have a book out on this and, I research this and I study this, but caveats aside, I really do think that we're sort of entering this new era of sort of rethinking the ways in which an organization works at its core. And there's a ton of experimentation going on, not just in the FANGs of the world, the large organizations, but startups and the companies that are trying to transform. So there's lots of opportunity for us to learn together and to sort of expand the frontier collectively as well. So I hope you keep engaged with us and join us also on Slack.
Sure.
Thanks everybody, and stay safe. Sorry, Roger, did you want to?
I threw out my email. I know I didn't answer all the questions, but if someone wants to email me a question, I'll do my best to answer it. And so anyway, yeah, feel free to contact me. So.
Yeah, so the Slack community link is going to come to you via email from us in a couple of days. We'll ask you for a survey about this talk, and then also the link to our Slack community, and then you'll get the secret keys to our hangout where the cool people at Lish hang out.
Okay, great. Be happy to do that. Thanks,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you so much, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy. Bye-bye.